Before we proceed, Mr. Pretorius, I just want to announce that I have just issued a media statement that is being sent out right now in regard to the position of the Secretary of the Commission. Thank you. Let's proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Watson, we were dealing with the affidavit of Mr. Fenton and the attestation which appears at page 266.
Yes, Chair.
When did you receive a copy of this affidavit, signed and sworn?
Chair, if I can add, I think I only received it early January. I wasn't interested. I got missed calls from the gentleman, but I can't remember exactly when I received it.
All right. So as far as I understand your evidence, after the meeting in December he left, he then went on holiday, and in January you received a statement. I gather from that you would know nothing about the particular dates upon which the affidavit was prepared and actually signed and sworn.
I only see the dates. I had an unsigned copy, but I see the dates in front of me now.
Right.
Mr. Pretorius, just remind me of the page where that affidavit
266, Chair, of the bundle S2.
Yes, thank you.
The only point I raise in this regard, Mr. Agrizzi, that seems not to be matters within your knowledge, but perhaps the investigators can follow it up, is that the statement appears to have been signed on the 19th of December 2017 at George and attested to on the 18th of December 2017 at Mossel Bay. But I'm not sure that you can assist the Commission there.
I can't offer any comment on that.
Can we go back?
Mr. Pretorius, just to make sure, the affidavit you're talking about starts at page 252, is that
Yes,
right?
Chair.
Yeah, 266 is where it ends.
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
And at page 252 is a document which we now know is the affidavit. It's headed Stephanus Fenton, highly confidential, G. Watson, tax fraud. It reads affidavit of Petrus Stephanus Fenton. There's an identity number of Noordheelwil, Krugersdorp, Gauteng. Do you know where Mr. Fenton lived?
I have no clue where he lives. I know from the affidavit that it's in Noordheelwil.
Okay, but you don't know whether that's true or not from your personal knowledge?
No, I wouldn't know.
Right. Then there's another heading, context of tax fraud and racketeering by Gavin Watson. And then it goes on to say, my full names are Petrus Stephanus Fenton, white male, age 46, resident at Noordheelwil, Krugersdorp. Hereby declare that the attached affidavit and the annexures labeled files 1 to 2 are a true reflection of the occurrences at Bosasa Group of Companies, stroke African Global Operations, and the dealing of Mr. Gavin Joseph Watson. Before we go on, reference is made to files 1 to 2 as annexures to the affidavit. Did you also receive those at the time you received this affidavit?
I did, Your Honour. Sorry, Chair.
Where are those files now?
Those files were initially all submitted to the attorney that dealt with the matter in the beginning and are still with him at the moment.
The attorney that represented you and others.
Correct.
It goes on to read in the next paragraph on page 252, the statements made are, in my opinion, factual, substantiated by records and copies of invoices and receipts. The intention hereof is not to seek monetary gain, but to clear mine and related parties' names after being coerced and forced to conduct what we realize what instructions from Gavin Joseph Watson. Sentence appears to be incomplete. This matter has affected my health and relationships. And then the last paragraph reads, this affidavit is done without any duress or pressure and is done subsequent to the meetings held with Gavin Watson as detailed. And then there's a footer at the bottom of the page. In relation to this first cover page of the affidavit of Mr. Fenton, do you recognize its structure?
Yes, I do.
Tell the Chair what
Chair,
you know.
Chair, he requested that I send him a copy, email him a copy of the structure of the way that the affidavits were done by Andries van Tonder.
And did you do so?
I did so.
And is the cover page of the affidavit you sent him similar to the cover page of this affidavit?
It is similar, but there are some differences. I can't recall exactly what the differences are.
Where did you, to what address did you send this model affidavit to which you refer?
It was an email address, if I recall correctly, it was PETV1972@gmail.com.
Where was, do you know where Mr. Fenton was at the time you sent the affidavit?
Now, this affidavit, he was in Krugersdorp at the time. This was done in November that he asked me to do this, send it to him. It was early November, probably around the 6th of November 2017.
All right. Mr. Agrizzi, I'm going to take you through the contents of this affidavit. The purpose of doing so, as intimated to the Chair, is to see what facts in this affidavit you agree with and of what facts you have no knowledge and what facts you disagree with, so that all we are looking for at this stage is what knowledge you personally have in relation to the facts set out here.
I will do so.
The first paragraph reads, I was employed as an auditor with the South African Revenue Services from December 1991 to August 2004. Do you know whether those facts are true and correct?
I cannot comment on that.
Right. He then says in paragraph 2, during my last year with SARS, I met Andries van Tonder and Tony Perry from the Bosasa Group. Do you know whether that's correct?
I cannot comment on that.
Can you comment on any of the contents in paragraph 2?
I cannot comment on paragraph 2's comments at all.
And what is the position in relation to the contents of paragraphs 3 and 4? Can you comment on the correctness or otherwise of any of the allegations there?
I cannot comment on paragraph 3. In terms of paragraph 4, I cannot comment.
Let's look at paragraph 5. Do you know whether it is correct that over the years Mr. Fenton built up a good relationship with Tony Perry, Andries van Tonder, Gavin Watson, Jacques van Zyl, Carlos Bonifacio, all the directors and other employees of the Bosasa Group?
I can comment on that is correct. I saw them numerous times at the diner together, having lunch, and they seem to get on pretty well.
The next paragraph reads, Gavin Watson realized this and wanted me to get more involved in the business in the form of a consultant from an external point of view. I was therefore not just a tax consultant for the Bosasa Group. Do you know whether that is, from your own knowledge, true?
I don't know if that is true.
Do you know what role he played for the Bosasa Group?
Yes, he was a tax consultant. He did our taxes, my personal tax that he did as well, because Gavin Watson insisted on that. And I know that he also consulted to various other people in the group.
At least you do know that it is true that he was not just a tax consultant for the Bosasa Group, but he performed other functions.
Yes, Gavin Watson trusted him.
Yes. All right, let's move on then. He says in paragraph 7, although I had to attend to the normal duties of a tax consultant, Gavin Watson wanted more from me.
That is true.
And then he says against the first bullet, Gavin Watson informed all the directors that I will be handling their annual personal tax returns and the company will pay for the service. Is that a true statement?
That is true.
He then says against the second bullet, I was also instructed to do the annual tax return of Patrick Gillingham.
Correct.
You know that to be true from your own knowledge.
Yes.
At what time was this a valid statement? In other words, to what period did the actions in dealing with the tax return relate?
Probably relating to, or from 2011 around there, or 2010. I can't recall exact dates.
And what was Patrick Gillingham's position at that time?
Well, Patrick Gillingham was not employed at Correctional Services, but he was employed at BEE Foods, which is owned by Gavin's brother-in-law.
All right. When you say Patrick Gillingham was not employed at Correctional Services, perhaps we should be accurate and say when he was not employed and when he was employed at Correctional Services, to the extent that you can remember.
I think the date was 2009.
So is your evidence that Gillingham would have left Correctional Services by 2009?
If I recall.
And then after that received employment within the Bosasa Group?
Well, no, that wouldn't be correct. It's not within the Bosasa Group. It was within BEE Foods, but it was with not with Gavin Watson, with Gavin Watson's brother-in-law.
Okay. And then reference is made to Mr. Fenton dealing with the annual tax return of MTI.
That's correct.
Do you know that to be a correct fact?
That is correct.
And do you know to which period that would relate?
If I'm not mistaken, I also can't recall exactly, but it would have been the same time as Gillingham, which, if I recall correctly, was 2009, Jay.
Then in paragraph 8, the following statement is made. At the beginning of 2016, Gavin Watson approached me to take over Concilium Business Consultants Pty Limited, a company which belonged to Dr. Jurgen Smith. Dr. Smith was diagnosed with cancer and wanted to exit the company as soon as he could. Concilium is a labor broker company who employs people for the Bosasa group of companies, and I'm quoting directly from the affidavit.
That is correct.
Are all the facts in paragraph 8 correct?
Correct.
Paragraph 9 reads, all Gavin Watson's family members, and again I read exactly what I see, who renders no service to the Bosasa group are also on the payroll. Gavin Watson instructed me to keep this very confidential, and I wasn't allowed to discuss this with anybody else other than him. What do you know of those facts?
That is correct. It's been a practice for many years.
If we can then go on, please, to paragraph 10 on page 255. Paragraph 10 reads, during the middle of August 2017, Gavin Watson approached me to assist him to pay the legal costs of Mr. Hlaudi Motsonen. On 17 August 2017, I received an invoice from Walter Jelle from Majavu Attorneys - proof attached. Before we go into the detail, do you know anything about those facts?
I don't know the details, but I have seen the proof and the payments made.
you've seen proof of the payments. Are those the payments referred to in the subsequent lines of paragraph 10?
That's correct.
Do you have those available?
I've submitted everything to the Commission in digital format, but the printed copies are with my erstwhile attorneys.
All right. So the paragraphs regarding payment read, I have paid the total invoice amount of 1,187,656 Rand 82 cents in 2 installments. First payment of 600,000 Rand on 20 August 2017, proof attached. Second payment of 587,656 Rand 82 cents on 21 August 2017, proof attached. You say you've seen those documents?
Yes, I have.
And are they documents which reflect those amounts and dates?
I just want to clarify for the Chair that I would not have attached this affidavit if there was any untruths or anything not clear in this affidavit backed up by proof. Everything was there.
Yeah. And these are payments of legal costs paid by Bosasa in favor of Mr. Claudio Muswaneng. Is that the documentation you have attached reflects that?
It does reflect that.
Okay, thank you.
Paragraph 11 then reads, during September 2017, Gavin Watson approached me to assist him and Sivion Dlamini to make 3 payments to Morocco Consultants Training and Development Pty Limited. Let's pause there. Firstly, do you know who Sivion Dlamini is? I think you've mentioned him in your evidence, but please just remind the Chair who he is.
Chair, he used to work for me. He was previously a social worker that worked at the youth centres. We then got promoted to a director of Bosasa Youth Development Centres.
Do you know anything about the transaction described here?
All I know is I saw the transaction and I was told by Mr. Fenton that it was not anything else but money laundering to get money to somebody. No services were provided.
When you say you saw the transaction, do you mean to say that you actually saw a physical manifestation of the transaction, or you saw a record of the transaction?
I saw a record of the transaction in terms of an agreement that was drawn up for consultancy services to Morocco, and then the payments to Morocco.
So did you see the agreement?
Yes, I did.
Did you know the agreement to be a genuine agreement or not?
It was not a genuine agreement. It was just a smoke.
And then you say you served further records. Did these records relate to payments?
Correct.
Okay. The paragraph continues on page 255, paragraph 11, to read, Lindsay Watson prepared a consulting agreement between Miyotto Trading and Advisory Holdings Pty Limited and Morocco Consultants Training and Development Pty Limited. Attached, no services have been provided as this is merely a front for other intentions. Do you know the entity Miyotto Trading and Advisory Holdings Pty Limited?
I do.
Please tell the Chair what that entity is.
Chair, Miyotto is just a shelf company owned by Mr. Fenton and I think his sister, Mrs. Longsworth, who's also the director, the owner or the shareholder in Concilia.
Is that the agreement that you say you have seen?
That's correct.
And do you know whether services were provided or whether this was a front for other intentions?
Chair, it would be very difficult to provide training services for 1 point whatever million rand to 2 people.
All right.
Thank you.
It continues to read, I had to make 3 payments of 450,000 Rand each to Morocco Consultants. The first payment was made on 30 September 2017, proof attached. The second payment was made on 28 October 2017, proof of payment attached. The final payment is only due by the end of November 2017. Before we go on, Mr. Agrizzi, the proof of payments attached, have you seen those?
I have seen the proof of payments attached, except the proof of payment for the end of November 2017, because obviously this agreement or this affidavit was written before the end of November 2017.
Okay. The first two payments and proof of these payments, when did you see them? At the time they were made, or at the time the affidavit was sent back to you with annexures, or both?
I saw the payments at the time that Mr. Fenton submitted his annexures with his affidavit.
Thank you. The affidavit goes further to, and I'm sorry, I must take a step back. The proof of payments, that documentation, has it suffered the same fate as the other documentation you referred to? It's with your erstwhile attorneys.
Unfortunately,
the affidavit concludes on page 255 at least. The agreement mentions that Morocco Consultants will, quote, provide and render consulting services to Mioto for a turnaround business strategy and to provide the necessary training and development to implement such, unquote. Do you recall that being in the agreement?
I recall seeing it and being explained that it was nothing but a farce.
Right. Let's move then to page 256 and paragraph 12. Paragraph 12 reads, in its first paragraph, Gavin Watson approached me once again on 17 October 2017. He wanted me to assist him with a payment towards the purchase of a residential property for Ms. Lindy Goos. Do you know anything about that transaction or that allegation and whether that is true or not?
That is true, Chair. It was a regular occurrence. It won't be the first house that we purchased for Mrs. Lindy Goos.
Who is Mrs. Lindy Goos?
Ms. Lindy Goos used to work at Bosasa and then had to leave and started a ministry of sorts called My World Ministries, and is a very close associate of Mr. Watson.
Right. Paragraph 2 reads...
I'm sorry, Mr. Pretorius.
Yes, Chair.
Mr. Agrizzi, you say it was a regular occurrence. Is that the purchasing of property for Ms. Lindy Goos? Is that what you say was a regular occurrence, or is it something else?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you.
The second part of paragraph 12 then goes on to read, the amount was for 2.5 million rand, and I had to consider the amount to be a loan. And in brackets, Ms. Goos insisted that a loan agreement be drawn up, close brackets. Do you know anything about those facts?
I do. We would normally draw up a loan agreement to avert donations tax.
And in relation to the amount, 2.5 million rand, do you know anything about that?
Probably a deposit.
I'm sorry? Probably a deposit, you say?
Yes, I'm aware of the property that she purchased. That was probably a deposit.
Do you know that a property was purchased at around this time?
Mr. Fenton showed me the documentation, and it was a property in, look, I don't like to give out addresses and that.
Yeah,
I don't want to do that. But it was a property on a hilltop overlooking Roodepoort.
And did the value of the property exceed 2.5 million rand?
Oh, yes.
What would be, would you be able to make your own layperson's estimate of what its true value might have been at the time you were shown?
If I recall correctly, and I stand to correction, she had a property previously in the same complex. And I think she mentioned to me once that she sold it for, I think, 5.5 million.
And you think this one might have been?
But it was in the same complex, so
Yeah.
I don't know. Look, I don't have the details of
No,
what the
that's fine.
transaction were, so I don't want to really assume anything.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
If you go on then to the third part of paragraph 12, it reads, Gavin Watson took me to Natasha Olivier and instructed her to pay 3 million rand from his personal account into Mioto Trading and Advisory Holdings Pty Limited bank account. Do you know anything about that payment?
I haven't seen any documentation that Gavin Watson told him to do that, but knowing Gavin Watson, that is probably correct, and he did show me as proof the transfer into Mioto's bank account from Gavin Watson.
Right. The next portion of paragraph 12 reads, and these are Mr. Fenton's words, of course, it must be noted that I could not question Gavin Watson as he would get upset with me. So I made the payments even though I knew that this was not correct. Now, I don't want you to comment on the state of mind of Mr. Fenton. That's for him to say. But the sentiment that he expresses there in relation to following Gavin Watson's order, does that come as a surprise to you from your own experience?
Most definitely not.
Do you want to elaborate?
One didn't challenge Gavin Watson. You just don't challenge him. He'll destroy you.
Yeah, okay.
Then, in relation to the payment of 3 million rand, Mr. Fenton says in the next portion of paragraph 12, 2.5 million rand was for the purchase of Ms. Gou's residential property and 500,000 rand to EFG2, the figure 2, with an ABSA bank account. I was merely told it was for a foundation trust of Andile Ramaphosa, the son of the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa. I found this strange but wouldn't dare question Gavin Watson. Do you see that?
I do.
Now let's just pause there, please. Do you know anything about the second payment referred to from your own knowledge?
Yeah, personally, I didn't want to get involved in it because I, number one, didn't believe it. I thought, it just can't happen, this type of transaction. But he showed me a transfer into that account, and that I saw. That's all I saw.
All right. Now, just let's pause there, please. The affidavit that we're dealing with now is, I understand, in the public domain. Do you know of that?
I was made aware of it, that if you Google Petrus Stephanus Fenton, that apparently is him or someone else, put it in the public domain.
Right. So this whole affidavit is not being released here for the first time. It is public knowledge.
Correct.
The allegation here in relation to the 500,000 rand, did you ever release that allegation to the press?
No, I did not.
And then, if we may revert to paragraph 12, it continues. The last part of paragraph 12 reads, the 3 million rand was paid on 17 October 2017 into Mioto's bank account. Do I understand your evidence correctly? You've seen proof of payment of that.
Correct.
Let's move on then to paragraph 13. It says that on the morning of 6 November 2017, Ms. Gous called and informed me that she is not going ahead with the transaction and I should repay Gavin Watson's money immediately. Do you know anything about that?
I know that she realized that this came to the attention of other people.
And do you know what was done subsequent to that realization?
I haven't got a clue. I wasn't following up on it. It wasn't something that really interested me.
All right. So I presume then you would not be able to comment on the meeting between Ms. Gous and her attorney that gave rise to that decision.
I didn't show any interest.
And nor would you have any knowledge of the attorneys who handled the property transaction or its cancellation.
All I can say is the only true thing that I know about is that she's paranoid, and he mentions whom she was paranoid about. That's all I can mention.
All right. So you say that, as far as you're aware, is correct?
Correct.
Then on page 257, further reference is made, and you have made reference to the statement in paragraph 14 regarding payment of 500,000 Rand to EFG2 into an ABSA account. And then it follows, Gavin Watson mentioned that the payment is towards Andile Ramaphosa Foundation, proof of payment attached. Apart from seeing proof of that payment, you have no knowledge of that transaction?
Chair, I was not interested in it. I was shocked with it, and I didn't want to actually get involved with it.
All right.
And that's why I averted my attention from it. The main reason I attached Piet Venter's affidavit in my statement is not to go at the President or the President's son, but to refer to the tax evasion that concerned me.
All right, we'll come to that, but it's necessary to deal with it fully. You've already told the Chair that you don't know whether that allegation is true and correct, and you've also told the Chair that you are unable, or you are in fact able to say that you never released any such information to anyone, including the media.
That was public knowledge on the internet.
Yes. Paragraph 15 reads, Gavin Watson asked me to assist Lindy Gous on many occasions, from calming her down to getting her to focus. One of the tasks he instructed me to do was register a company called the Exchange Space Pty Limited. The purpose of the company is to do the marketing and branding of the Bosasa African Global Group. Do you know anything about, let's leave aside the personal matters, but do you know anything about the establishment and registration of that company, the Exchange Space Pty Limited?
I haven't got a clue.
All right. Then, in the second part of paragraph 15, there's an allegation that over and above her monthly salary, I had to now pay Lindy Gous a gross salary of 42,000 Rand per month in order to clear a net amount of 24,000 Rand. This amount had to go towards Ms. Gous's bond repayment, 1 million bond repayable over 10 years, just estimated. Proof of the payslip is attached. Do you know anything about those facts?
I've seen this, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I wasn't interested.
And then it goes on to say, I want to emphasize the fact that the salary from the Exchange Space Pty Limited was purely for the bond repayment, as Ms. Gous got paid or gets paid from Consilium Business Consultants for her services. Her monthly cost to the company is 137,000 Rand, 717. Do you know anything about those facts?
It's just very expensive, but no, I don't.
Right.
I know what I've been told.
Now, if it is alleged in evidence, as we have learnt might be alleged, that this affidavit and its contents came about as a result of you compelling Fenton to attest to this affidavit. Is there any likelihood that you would have forced Fenton, for example, to put the facts contained in paragraph 14 and 15 on record and attest to it? Could you have caused this, let alone by compulsion?
Well, number one is the proof I've seen. I can attest to that. I can attest that where it refers to a payment, where it refers to a transaction, a bond transaction, the discussion for a refund with the transferring attorneys, I can attest to the fact that those documentations are in his file. But I cannot attest, I can't agree to the statement that I would have forced him to make an affidavit. He did the affidavit of his own. 6 or 7 other people were there to see him write the affidavit himself and attach whichever annexures he felt suitable in the venue which I had offered up to all the whistleblowers to use. So he was seen by numerous people doing his own affidavit. And specifically for that reason, I would not get involved. I would stay away from him, and I was probably dealing with somebody else to assist them. So I take exception to the fact that they would say that I would coerce him to do this. I wouldn't even know this information.
Well, that's the point I'm making. It's hardly logical that you compel him to make an affidavit attesting to facts of which you're not aware.
Exactly.
Paragraph 16 reads, I would complain that this practice was incorrect and morally disturbing, but Gavin Watson threatened that my services and those of my company will be terminated. I had to do what was asked from me, or else what happened to so many would happen to me. Now, once again, Mr. Agrizzi, I don't ask you to try and testify as to what was in the mind of Mr. Fenton when he made this affidavit, but the circumstance that he refers to here in relation to the conduct of Gavin Watson, what do you say about that? Is it commonplace? Is it rare? Is it come to you as a surprise?
He had a dustbin with his name on it.
Who did? Mr. Fenton?
He didn't do what was told to do. Fenton would have a dustbin with the name on it, as I mentioned earlier.
Are you saying that the practice referred to here is a practice that, in your own experience and knowledge, is known to you?
Honourable Chair, I can tell you now that there are probably about 100 such examples out there.
All right. Then,
Thank you.
in paragraph 17 is a reference to yourself, and the following is said, Gavin Watson always wants someone else to blame for his actions. An example of this was when I had to ask Mr. Angelo Agrizzi what kind of Christian he is. When Mr. Agrizzi took Mr. Watson on about this, I had to take the blame for the attack on Mr. Agrizzi's character. It is a constant and disturbing pattern that Gavin Watson would instruct people to act illegally and then discard them or get rid of them as he felt it got rid of the evidence. Do you have any comment on the accuracy of that statement or those statements?
I'd prefer not to comment on that if the Chair agrees.
Thank you.
Well, perhaps we could just say, is it true or false?
Well, if he says he doesn't want to comment, I think he doesn't want to say whether true or false.
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Then over the page 258, in the same paragraph 17, the affidavit continues, interestingly, Gavin Watson would never sign anything so as to exonerate himself from any wrongdoing. This was evident in the fact that his intention with Graham Richards was to implicate Agrizzi and Fenton, whereas they never benefited. Let's deal firstly with the first sentence of that paragraph. Interestingly, Gavin Watson would never sign anything. That's consistent with your evidence thus far. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As to the remainder of that portion of the paragraph, what is your evidence?
I attended a meeting at one stage with Brian Biebuck, and I think Advocate Manny Witz or Attorney Daniel Witz was present, where we were told that Gavin Watson had made a statement, and if we spoke out, he's already made his statement, a two-page statement with Graham Richards. I don't know what was in the statement, I never read it, but he was going to use that to implicate us.
All right. So you know something of the facts there.
Some of it.
All right. Paragraph 18. Mr. Gavin Watson just kept on making illegal demands, and I just couldn't take it anymore. The last nail in the coffin was when he told me to meet with Mr. Patrick Gillingham,
Yes.
and to hand him a parcel containing cash. I knew it was cash because it was wrapped in a bank secure bag. All right. Mr. Fenton here refers to a specific incident when, according to Mr. Fenton's affidavit, Mr. Patrick Gillingham was handed cash in a bank secure bag, as he describes it. Do you know anything about that particular transaction?
I don't know this actual transaction other than what I've read and what I've been told, and that is what I was told.
generally speaking, do you know from your own knowledge whether Mr. Patrick Gillingham received cash?
Yes, every month.
Were you ever present when such a delivery was made?
Yes, Chair, I made these deliveries sometimes myself.
So we'll come to that in due course.
Did you earlier on or yesterday say his was 110,000 per month? Or you can't remember?
That is correct, it's 110.
Thank you.
And does that appear in your black book, in fact?
It actually does.
Let's go on. The second part of paragraph 18 reads, "This happened on Friday, 27 October 2017. I had to go to the office of Bosasa African Global, where Lindsay Watson, the daughter of Gavin Watson, handed me a parcel. You wouldn't have known of that, I presume,
No, I wouldn't.
but is it in accordance with the practice that you knew?"
Chair, that, yes, it was pretty much the practice.
He then says, "I reluctantly called Mr. Gillingham, who met me at my office at 269 Voortrekker Road, Monument, Krugersdorp. An hour later, I handed him the parcel and he left. I decided that this will never happen again." You don't know, I understand from your evidence, of that particular incident.
I recall him phoning me about it and telling me how upset he was and that he'd been brought into this whole thing. That's all, Chair.
Paragraph 19 reads, "Mr. Gavin Watson promoted Louis Passano and Colleen Passano to handle the company and group finances." I'll read the whole paragraph. "Louis Passano approached me during October 2017 to make changes to his payslip. He is an employee of Consilium Business Consultants Pty Limited. He instructed me on behalf of Gavin Watson to reduce his salary from 137,000 Rand cost to company per month to 90,000 cost to company per month." Do you know anything about the allegations in that paragraph?
I don't know anything about it other than I see and I was told, but I can't believe it.
Right. But you have no direct knowledge of that?
No.
You could never have told, I then conclude, Mr. Fenton to put that in an affidavit, let alone coerce him.
No, Chair, but I can believe the credibility of that.
Paragraph 20 reads, "When I confronted him about this," and in parenthesis, it's Fenton confronting Watson that's being referred to here. I'll repeat. "When I confronted him about this, he was very vague about this, but then he mentioned something about his estate. It was then when I realized that he was sequestrated and should not be in the position of running a company's finances. The second thing is that he wants to show his curator that he earns less than he does. By doing this, he will pay a lower amount to his creditors." It continues, "I have attached the before and after payslips. Louis Passano also mentioned that Mr. Gavin Watson will pay the balance in cash. By doing this, he defrauds the South African Revenue Service as well as the curator. The actions could eventually impact on Consilium as, it reads, amounts to a fraudulent transaction. Besides, Louis Passano already has a 5-year suspended sentence." Do you know anything about the facts in this paragraph?
I'm aware of the facts. I'm aware of the youngster. I tried to rehabilitate him at one stage. I took him under my wing. But I wasn't aware that he had the criminal convictions that he had. But I can believe it.
Do you know anything about the circumstances of the sequestration?
He was
and the fraud referred to here?
No, I can't comment on that. I wasn't present. I only see what I was told.
All right.
Mr. Pretorius,
Yes, Chair.
I think if I heard you correctly, in relation to the first line of paragraph 20, you said that the person that was being confronted was Mr. Gavin Watson. It seems to me that in the context of that paragraph, it probably wasn't him. Is it not the person whose estate is said to have been sequestrated that they are talking about, that was being confronted?
Yes, you're correct, Chair. The confrontation in the full context may well have taken place between Mr. Fenton on the one hand and Mr. Pisano on the other.
Yes, you
Because it was
previously
Mr.
said
Pisano's
Mr. Watson.
estate that was involved. Yes,
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah.
The point being that neither the witness, Mr. Agrizzi, nor I know anything about the contents of this paragraph. Then paragraph 21, Mr. Agrizzi reads, pursuant to the closure of COAC, Gavin Watson in a meeting clearly stipulated that he did not want to lose the assessed loss of 138,498,378 rand as at the 2012 tax year, and Gavin Watson insisted, rather more instructed, that both Andries van Tonder and I do everything possible to maximize the use of the loss by filtering the tax exposure of profits in other operations via the entity.
That is correct.
Right, you say that is correct. Do you know what COAC was?
Yeah. Chair, I do. COAC was a aquaculture project that Gavin Watson embarked on. It was a maverick project. It would cost the company dearly. I think the cost was about 400 million, and it was successful.
Right. And it is apparent, an assessed loss of over 138 million rand. Are you aware of that as a fact?
That is a fact.
Right. And that occurred, according to the affidavit, as at the 2012 tax year.
Correct.
Was it not one of those that you told me about earlier, which were specially created only to be liquidated later?
No.
Or this was different?
This one was a project that was we were approached by an American to grow prawns in the Kruger Eastern Cape Development Zone.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So it was a costly investment.
Most definitely.
You say you know of the facts in the first 3 lines of that paragraph. Do you know anything about the use of that loss by filtering the tax exposure of profits into other operations via that entity COAC? In other words, attributing the loss to other companies.
Yes, I'm aware of it.
Right. From your own knowledge?
Yes.
Right. Paragraph 22 reads, Andries van Tonder was instructed to change the main business of the company, to incorporate provision for the company to utilize the assessed loss by inflating the purchase price of the raw material to other contracts, thereby utilizing the company, COAC, as the newly changed Bosasa supply chain, which would handle all major purchases for the group, reselling the group goods at a markup, thereby effectively reducing the profits of the other entities and averting having to pay tax on the profits. That's a long sentence. It may not be immediately apparent to people who aren't tax experts like myself, but what do you say about the contents? Firstly, are they accurate? And if they are accurate, can you just explain to the Chair what happened?
Well, I'm definitely not a tax expert, let alone an accountant. But basically, Chair, what was being done was that if you change the structure and the purpose, the intent of a business, you are able then to change the name and utilize it for something else. So with that tax loss, for instance, what they would do was they would use that tax loss and have a company called Bosasa Supply Chain Management, which was COAC trading as Bosasa Supply Chain Management, then Bosasa Supply Chain Management would buy from suppliers and on-sell those goods at a much higher price than market-related to the operational company Bosasa. So the profits would reside in Bosasa Supply Chain Management. Now, if the profits reside in Bosasa Supply Chain Management, you will show losses in the other companies, because now what you've done is you've hiked the prices up in Bosasa Supply Chain Management and you're making good profits. So you make up to 50, 60, 70% profits now all of a sudden in Bosasa Supply Chain Management, which suits the situation that you have a tax loss in there. So eventually you'll use up your tax loss and then you would have to start paying tax. But that's basically the way it was structured, how I understood it at least.
Thank you. I'm not sure that you made clear to the Chair whether you know of this particular set of facts set out in paragraph 22, as opposed to the practice.
Well, I asked Piet Fenton on the phone once upon a time when he phoned me about this, and I asked him, is it actually fraudulent? And he said to me, yes, it is. And he then said, but we have to create invoices and manufacture fraudulent invoices to win the SARS investigation over. Now, you remember that he was from SARS, and there was other people that from SARS as well that assisted in the process, but he knew what to do to make it acceptable to SARS to be able to grant the assessed tax loss for the future tax years. So that's how I understood it. I must confess, I'm not a tax specialist, and I didn't get involved with the nitty-gritty at all.
So your knowledge of this transaction and its implications emanates from your discussions with Piet Fenton?
Chair, yes, with Piet Fenton, but also with other colleagues and people. I would always check up on people and ask what the situation was.
Let's go then to paragraph 23. Perhaps I preempted your evidence. Paragraph 23 reads, the value of this created an opportunity to evade tax on an amount of 38 million rand, 779,546. I was told that documents and processes were fraudulently manufactured in order to win the SARS investigation by satisfying them that CARC did trade for tax purposes, which allowed the company to carry forward the assessed loss to future tax years.
That is correct. I checked out on that.
You know of that, again, on the same basis that you know of the facts in the previous paragraph?
Correct.
Paragraph 24 reads, SARS stipulated that proof had to be submitted to substantiate the claims and the argument of trade. Such proof was then fraudulently drawn up. As a result of the changes made and the submissions made, SARS granted the allowance of the assessed loss.
That is correct.
Again, on the same basis as you've referred to before.
I saw the affidavits that were attached to his, not the affidavits, the statements that were made to SARS attached to some of the whistleblowers' statements.
So you have seen in writing the representations made to SARS?
Correct. They were signed by the company's secretary. I'm not sure if it was the company secretary or the commissioner of oaths within the company.
So you've seen independent documentation or documentation which independently verifies the allegations, at least in paragraph 24.
Correct.
And the documents you've seen, are they consistent with the contents in paragraph 24?
Most definitely. It looks like they were drawn up by one of the chartered accountants.
Then let's go on to paragraph 25. We needn't go into any detail there, but there's a calculation of the assessed loss and the tax that would have been payable in respect thereof, and the fact that there was a write-off allowed by SARS pursuant to their investigation.
That is correct.
Would it have been possible for you, given the facts you knew yourself, as opposed to the facts you learnt, to have told Mr. Fenton to, let alone compelled Mr. Fenton to make the allegations that he did in paragraphs 21 to 25?
Chair, I was not concerned with the tax matters of the company. My responsibility was to make sure that we have a well-run organization in terms of operations. I had to make sure that there would never ever be a complaint of the services we offered. That was my job. In terms of the tax matters and that was handled by people like Colleen Pisano, Louis Pisano, Andries van Tonde, Carlos Bonifacio. I had nothing to do with the tax matters.
Let's move on then to paragraph 26 and paragraph 27. Paragraph 26 reads, during the period 2015 to 2017, Gavin Watson decided to build residential homes for his newly married son, Roth Watson, and his daughter, Lindsay Watson, in Morningside, Fenton.
That's correct.
You know of that fact.
I do.
The houses were to be registered on Gavin Watson's name, to the best of my knowledge. Do you know anything about that?
That would be standard practice.
Paragraph 27 reads, Gavin Watson instructed Andries van Tonde, the Chief Financial Officer of the group, to oversee the payments to suppliers via the company financial process and allocate the costs thereof to the various property companies such as Leipart's Flay Property, Leading Prospect Trading Lindella, etc., where large revamps were underway. Let's just stop there. Do you know from your own knowledge whether those facts are in their detail true and correct?
They are.
Just remind the Chair, Leipart's Flay Property, I don't know if you've mentioned that company before. What company is that?
It's not a company, it's just a name of a facility. It's old mining hostels that were transformed into businesses. At first it was for a prawn farm, and then it was transformed again to a copper plant.
Leipart's Flay Property, is that entity or that property owned by any company in the Bosasa Group?
It's owned by Bosasa Properties Pty Ltd. All the properties are in Bosasa Properties Pty Ltd.
Right. And Leading Prospect Trading, Lindella, etc., you've already told the Chair that the Lindella Repatriation Centre was managed or administered by the Bosasa company, Leading Prospect Trading, correct? It's Leading Prospect Trading 111 Pty Limited.
Correct.
And is it correct that at the time large revamps were underway in respect of these properties?
Correct.
And the affidavit continues to say these costs were either capitalized or expensed within the existing property companies that held properties within the group of companies. I presume the reference there, it's common sense, is to the Bosasa group of companies.
Correct.
Do you know that that actually occurred, either specifically in this case, if not generally?
Generally it would occur, Chair.
But you've not seen any books in relation to the capitalization or deduction in operating expenses in relation to this particular transaction?
In terms of this transaction, Chair, the only thing I know is that at one stage there was a debate on the over-expenditure at Lindella, and that's when I personally knew that a lot of these costs had been through the company. That's the first really, that's when I really got involved.
And then it continues to say this means from order to invoice and payment, the invoices would have had to look authentic. The invoices were made out to the various entities, and Peter Reicher was tasked to attend to the paperwork. I am aware Peter Reicher was instructed to make these fraudulent entries as he mentioned the matter to me during consultation. I am also aware that he has kept records due to the fact that Joe Media director actually inquired as to the rising costs at the Lindela Repatriation Center. Carlos Bonifacio also queried the rising costs. I was later tasked to retrench Peter Reicher. What do you have to say about those allegations that we've just read onto the record?
It's true. And Peter Reicher had a dustbin with his name on it.
He was in fact retrenched.
Chair, he was dismissed, and I believe he's now staying in Australia.
Then on the top of page 261, the first part of paragraph 27, the affidavit reads, this resulted in the costs being absorbed by the company as cost of sales and therefore having been expensed, reduced the tax liability on the company, allowing Gavin Watson the benefit of not paying for the houses personally, but also allowing for the benefit to be passed on to the children. That comment relates to the implications of the transactions we've just described. Do you have any comment?
I can't really comment on that, Chair. I don't understand the transferring of the houses or the costs for the houses and what the impact would be on the tax and that. I'm not too sure. So I can't. I know about it, but I can't comment on it. I know about it.
So you say you know generally about the facts being attested to here, but your knowledge of tax matters is not sophisticated enough to allow you to construct such a paragraph with its conclusions.
No, I couldn't do that, no.
And then the paragraph concludes by saying Christopher Yun, an employee of the company, is used to oversee the construction. Do you know anything about that allegation?
No, that is fact. I was aware of that, Chair.
That Christopher Yun, firstly, is an employee of Bosasa and he oversaw the construction of those houses.
Yes.
All right. Paragraph 28 reads, Mark Taverner, brother-in-law to Gavin Watson, retains Patrick Gillingham on the payroll of BEE Foods on a salary of 65,000 Rand per month and a company car Mercedes GLA 200. The full costs are then added to the invoicing of BEE Foods. Do you know anything about those allegations?
I am aware of that.
What in particular, in its detail? They're quite serious allegations, potentially in the context of all the facts, which we'll come to.
Chair, that's true. Over and above the 110,000 Rand per month, Gillingham needed to show some sort of income that wasn't cash, and that was the 65,000 Rand per month, and he received a company car GLA of 200, a GLA 200. The full cost of that was added to the BE invoicing and just deducted again.
So you say you know about those facts, they are correct, but just to place those facts in their context in case there's any confusion, you have told the Chair that until 2009, I think, Mr. Gillingham was employed by the Department of Correctional Services. Is
Correct.
that correct? During the period of his employment with the Department of Correctional Services, was Mr. Gillingham receiving payments from Bosasa?
Yes, he was.
In what amount?
While he was in the employ, it was 47,000 Rand per month, as far as I remember. And when he was not in the employ, he would get 110,000 Rand per month.
So when Patrick Gillingham left, and we may talk about those circumstances later in your evidence, the Department of Correctional Services, and after that date, he continued to be paid monies by Bosasa, is that correct?
Correct.
Let's go on then to paragraph 29. The paragraph reads, and for the sake of time, I'm going to read the whole paragraph. During 2015, Gavin Watson, Lindsay Watson, and Roth Watson instructed me to assist them with the restructuring of the Watson family entities in order to gain financially from the Bosasa companies. They've identified the software license agreements, also known as the Trustmaster Fleet and Trustmaster Youth Centres, to be sold to a newly formed entity called Lamazest Pty Limited. That's spelled Lamozest. Agreements were prepared and the intellectual property, IP, was sold via a Pezulu fencing to Lamazest Pty. I'm reading it as it appears. Lamazest invoices Bosasa Youth Development Centres from August 2015 on average between 348,000 and 371,000 per month, and Lamazest started off by invoicing Coerano, KGWERANO Financial Services from August 2015, an amount of 437 Rand per month. This amount came down as the number of vehicles on the contract came down. I don't think the directors or the shareholders of the Bosasa Group are aware of the profits which are effectively extracted from the Bosasa entities, and only the Watson family is gaining from this. Before I ask you to comment on the contents of this paragraph, Mr. Agrizzi, Coerano, KGWERANO Financial Services, is the same company you've mentioned earlier in your evidence. Is that correct?
That's right, it's a fleet management company.
What do you say, or what are you able to say to the Chair about, firstly, the correctness of the allegations here, and secondly, any explanation of the scheme underlying these facts or allegations?
Chair, I can't make allegations here. At the end of the day, it was Watson's money alone, and he could do with it what he wanted, I suppose. But these are the transactions that happened. I've seen them, I've verified them, I checked up myself before I even looked at this statement in its entirety.
So you know these facts to be true. Do you know how the scheme worked or how the benefit was derived, apart from what's contained here? Because I'm not sure I understand.
Well, what happened was you had agreements between a NewCo called Lamazest, which was an arm's length company. It wasn't owned by any of the Bosasa companies. And what would happen is that company would have agreements for software development with the various other entities within the Bosasa group. And what that does then is there's no costs involved there for Lamazest. It just strips all the profits out of all the other entities. So even if you had bona fide shareholders, they would never see their dividends because all the profits would be stripped off by Lamazest through agreements for software and provision of software and that type of thing. So it was all quite a bit of fronting. At the end of the day, the shareholders in any other group wouldn't have got money anyway because it was all being moved out into Lamazest.
Thank you. Let's then move to paragraph 30 on page 261. It reads, the Watson family also wanted me to assist them to move a company called Pezulu Fencing Pty Limited away from the shareholders who were Bopa, B-O-P-A, and Pafoga, P-H-A-F-O-G-A, into the Watson family structure. We managed to achieve that, and by doing that, they got their hands on a 63 million loan account, which Bosasa Operations owes to Pezulu Fencing. The loan carries an interest, which means that the loan account just increases on an annual basis. As far as I know, the directors nor the shareholders of the Bosasa Group are aware of the financial gain which the Watson family is getting from this transaction. Firstly, then, the facts that are set out here, do you know whether they are correct or not?
They are correct.
And do you know that from your personal knowledge?
I checked up on it and it is correct.
And you will give evidence at another stage of those two trusts.
Yep.
The second part of paragraph 30 on page 262 reads, secondly, Pazulu Fencing was involved in a transaction with a company called Dealstream. 3 payments of approximately 10 million rand, 10 million rand and 17 million rand have been paid from Dealstream to Pazulu Fencing Pty Limited. Gavin Watson did not want to pay tax on these receipts because the company found themselves under cash flow pressure at the time. He insisted that we hide the receipts under contingent liability in the balance sheet instead of income, avoiding paying tax of 10.3 million rand. The facts alluded to in that section of paragraph 30 that I've just read to, do you know of them? Are they correct?
The facts are correct, but I can't really comment on them. I'm not geared to understand these type of balance sheet transactions.
Let's just take a step back at this stage, because it seems to me that your personal knowledge is insufficient to construct allegations like this relating to tax. Am I correct?
You're 100% correct.
Although this affidavit was sent to you in January 2018, it was drafted during November 2017.
That's correct.
The allegation might be that you didn't really compel Fenton to attest to this affidavit in December 2017, but you were involved in the drafting the statement at that stage during November, and you forced him to say what he says here. What do you say to that?
Then why would he have signed it, Chair?
Yes, all right.
Why would he have signed it if I'd forced him to write it?
I presume we can infer that you did not.
I most definitely did not.
Right. Let's then go to paragraph 31.
Well, but I'm not sure, Mr. Pretorius, whether that deals adequately with the purpose of your question.
All right, perhaps I'm, in the interests of time, trying to bundle too much into a question. I apologize. I'll take my time.
Okay, maybe I should just allow you to
yes, and insofar as I
thought
loopholes, you will fill them.
I thought that you were giving Mr. Agrizzi the opportunity to say why it's improbable, maybe, why he would, why it would be wrong to say he had compelled Mr. Fenton. And I thought maybe the answer that he gave might not really cover everything. But maybe it's just repeat the question and I'll listen to his answer again carefully. And then maybe I can articulate myself better as well.
Yes, my apologies, Chair. 4 o'clock won't come any sooner, even if I do try and hurry matters up in evidence. Let's take it step by step. We don't know, Mr. Agrizzi, precisely what Mr. Fenton and others might say about why this affidavit was ultimately attested to in December.
I will not know what they would say.
We have some information from the investigators that it will be said that you compelled Mr. Fenton to attest to this affidavit.
I can believe that.
You have said in relation to that allegation, well, of course you couldn't have because he was in the Cape and you were in Dainfern at the time the affidavit was attested to.
That's right, Chair.
But the allegation against you may be something different. It may be that the allegation that you forced Mr. Fenton to write up these facts and to ultimately attest to them on affidavit didn't occur in December, but occurred earlier in November when the statement which formed the basis of this affidavit was drafted. Because you have said that you saw a statement in this form early in December. Correct?
Correct.
So I'm saying to you that if it was or is in future put to you, well, Mr. Agrizzi, we're not talking about December when you might have been in Dainfern and Mr. Fenton was in the Cape. We're talking about November, and it is in November that you forced him to put these facts on paper. What do you say to that? I know there's a logical answer, which you alluded to, but what do you say to that?
Well, we've got until 4, Chair, I believe. So, number one is Mr. Fenton wrote his own statement in a facility that I allowed him to use. He wrote it on his own computer, and there are 5, 6, maybe even 7 people that can attest to it, that he sat on his own and did it by himself. Nobody assisted him at all. The second thing I'd like to raise is, it is amazing how Mr. Fenton first wanted to whistleblow and then didn't want to whistleblow, and then came back and asked to whistleblow. And that's when we said to him, look, if you want to whistleblow, then you need to put skin on the table and you need to sign your affidavit. And we will help you. I will help you as far as I can to support you with legal costs and all that type of thing where we can, so that we can clear this thing up. And he made use of that opportunity, and then in January, he turns again. It just doesn't make sense to me. Does that answer the question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you.
As far as you know, to the extent that it may be alleged that you compelled him, do you know what it is that you would have feared would happen to him from you if he did not comply?
Chair, I can't even answer that because I don't know what he realizes. I mean,
you are not aware of anything that he might have feared from you?
He might have been scared of the dog in my house. It'll bite him maybe, but definitely not. There was nothing that I could use. And by the way, the dog is a greyhound, so she hasn't got many teeth left either. But what I'm saying is, Mr. Chair, is that there's no ways I could have forced him into doing anything. He didn't even work with me or for me. He came to us and he said, look, he can't continue like this anymore. But he quickly changed his tune when he was offered a couple of 100,000 rand, because he came to me and he asked me the first time round. He says, can you afford to pay me 300,000 rand a month? And I said, I don't even do that myself. So one needs to look at his motives.
That then gives rise to the second question alluded to by the Chair now. You have told the Chair that the purpose of annexing this affidavit to your disclosures is to show, amongst other things, tax fraud.
That is correct.
Your knowledge of tax, we are learning and have learnt, is not the most detailed or sophisticated.
Very shaky, Chair.
Right. Is it possible for you to have either compelled Mr. Fenton to put the allegations that he did put in this affidavit into the affidavit, or to draft these allegations on his behalf? In other words, even to make them up.
Honourable Chair, for me to make them up would be ludicrous. I wouldn't know where to start.
Is my recollection correct that this is the same person who had approached you earlier on and indicated that he wanted to join the group that was going to blow the whistle, and did write a statement but changed his mind at some stage and backed off, or was there somebody else?
This is the same person, Chair.
And did you say that, did you deal with where that statement was, maybe, I should say, incomplete statement? Was that taken away by him, or is it under the control of somebody that you know?
Chair, as far as I know, he had the statement with him. And even if I look at the date that he apparently signed it on, where it's dated in typo, 19th of July, even if I tried to do the statement for him, how on earth would I have predicted he would have it signed off on the 18th of July, which is so close, 18th of, I can't even remember,
December.
18th of December, where he signed it off where he puts there the 19th of December. I mean, I wouldn't have known those things. I wouldn't have known where he's on holiday. I wouldn't have known which police station to meet him at. You can look at my travel records. I was nowhere near Mossel Bay or George.
Well, I'm talking about the one that was not completed. That's the one I'm talking about. You say you don't know where that one is.
No.
That one. Did you ever have a chance to read it before he stopped with writing it?
If the one
that we don't have here.
Okay, that one belongs to Carlos Bonifacio. I did read it.
Yes.
I did go through some of it, and it's.
Well, the question I want to ask you, if you did read it, is whether there are any features of this one which are the same as that one, if you are able to remember.
Yes, there is collaboration between the two.
And as far as you know, has he ever alleged that you compelled him to write that incomplete one?
No, I haven't had any allegations like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Right. If we may move on then, Mr. Agrizzi, on page 262 to paragraph 31. It reads, during January and February 2016, Gavin Watson and his daughter, Lindsay Watson, approached me to review the top shareholding structure of the Bosasa Group. I had to involve top professionals to assist us with this task. I approached Antonie van Wyk, consultant to TRM Daniel Erasmus Tax Court practitioners. Antonie drew up the shareholders agreement, annexure blank. Clause 16 of the shareholders agreement refers to a call option, an extract of clause 16, and then in the next 2 pages, the call option extract is included in the document. Firstly, do you know anything about these facts?
If I can respond to you, Chair, that on paragraph 31, what I'm aware of it because I've read it, but I don't understand the intention behind it. But what I fail to understand is that why, if you're reviewing shareholder structures, you'd normally involve all the shareholders, why only 3 were involved, 2 were involved.
All right. So apart from your question as to the logic of the allegations here or what happened here, you don't know of these transactions?
Not at all.
Right. Did you have the extract quoted here on this page and the following page in your possession at any time?
Your Chair, I did have this in my possession at one time because this was part of the agreement that was drawn up and that they wanted to front. But I had this in my possession, sorry.
Yes. Did you give this extract that you had to Mr. Fenton for the purposes of compiling this affidavit?
Most definitely not.
Let's go to paragraph 33 then. Well, let's first deal with paragraph 32. It is important to me to reveal the truth and allow a new start, as I have not unduly benefited from the corruption and dishonesty created by Gavin Watson. Insofar as you do have personal knowledge, do you know whether Mr. Fenton benefited or not from the practices within the Bosasa group of companies that were corrupt and dishonest?
Well, he's still keeping it under wraps, so he is benefiting.
Now, one significant difference it appears, and please correct me if I'm wrong, between the approach in this affidavit and your approach, and perhaps of the other whistleblowers we will learn in due course, is that I take it you admit that you benefited from the corruption and dishonesty created by Gavin Watson.
Well, yes, even if it was a holiday somewhere, one benefited from it, you did.
Yes, and you've actually set that out in your affidavit.
I think one must be blunt about it. If you benefit, you benefit.
Right, but the
Simple.
difference in approach and a factor that is different from your approach and that of Mr. Fenton's, Mr. Fenton said he didn't benefit. So again, that goes to whether you would have compelled Fenton to say what he said in paragraph 32. I know you said generally you didn't.
Not at all.
Then let's go to paragraph 33. An important note, says Mr. Fenton, is that on a previous occasion, the servers at Bosasa crashed, resulting in a massive data loss pursuant to years dealing with Mr. Gavin Watson. I learnt that he had arranged that they previously ensured the crash so that the SIU could not gather information. Mr. Andries Tonda and Mr. Angelo Agrizzi were aware of this. Let's stop there. What do you know about those allegations?
That's Andries van Tonder. You said Andries Tonder.
Andries van Tonder.
Yeah, it's van Tonder. You said Andries Tonder.
Did I?
Yeah.
I swallowed the fun. I'm sorry. What do you know about those facts?
That is a fact. That is what happened. It was before the SIU wanted to come and get information, and there was a suspicious data crash.
All right. It's an important allegation, and we will deal with it again when we deal with the SIU report, because there appears to be corroborating information. But for the moment, when did the quote crash unquote occur?
Gee.
You related to the SIU investigation.
Well, in relation to the SIU investigation, it would have then been 2008, 2009, maybe 2007. I need to, it probably was around the 2009 period, if I remember correctly.
Yes, we will learn more when we deal with later evidence.
Correct.
But in your own words, would you tell the chair, please, what occurred in relation to the crash?
Well, basically, Chair, what we did was we tendered our assistance to the SIU, which then called for a meeting with the SIU, which was conducted in Maisel's chambers on the 7th floor, just opposite Advocate Lawrence Hodes' offices, who was handling the matter. And basically there they gave us a list of items that they want to mirror on the server, and luckily the list wasn't that great, so we could say to them it wasn't a problem. They could come in the following couple of days to mirror the images.
These are data images on computers and
Correct.
servers. Yes.
Correct. But what we had orchestrated a month or 2 months before was a full data crash of the server, thinking that the SIU wouldn't pick up anything. But I think the SIU was a bit brighter than our IT guys. And although they crashed the system, they were able to get information off the system.
All right. What was the purpose of the crash? It may seem obvious, but perhaps you should place it on record.
The purpose of the crash would be to get rid of any potentially harmful or hazardous information that was on the system that we might not have picked up. That was the reason.
And again, it may seem fairly obvious to those in the know. What actually is a crash, and how does it work? Or how doesn't it work?
Well, you're asking once more, Chair, I'm not a computer expert. All I know is a crash, and then we have a computer expert next to us, but a crash is when the system doesn't work anymore and you stuck.
And
Like I was
what happens to the data on the system in a crash?
Well, it's erased, but it's not actually erased, I believe, because it's kept in some folders, hidden away somewhere.
Right.
And
So-
there are means to recover it.
So subject to recovery means a crash is designed to destroy electronically stored information or digitally stored information.
Correct.
The affidavit continues to read in paragraph 33, concerning is during October, I had a meeting with Mr. Gavin Watson in the office adjoining Mr. Andries van Tonder's. Mr. Watson then called Ms. Elise Eland to schedule another computer crash. This was discussed in my presence, that he then mentioned that a further circular had to go out, notifying the employees that they were supposedly experiencing server issues so that they would be aware that there was, and I read what I see, issues. This would ensure that the staff would be under the impression that the failure or crash could not be avoided. That way no one would be suspicious and they could get rid of potentially hazardous data files that could incriminate the company and its directors. Firstly, in regard to that information, it appears to tell of a second crash. Do you know of that?
I know of what is being put before me by Piet Venter in this affidavit, and when he did deliver it to me, my understanding is that the second crash is planned in November 2017, when they heard that people were going to whistleblow. That is my understanding.
Do you know whether it occurred?
I really wouldn't know. I'm sorry.
Do you know of any circular sent out to employees of Bosasa at around the time you're referring to, November 2017?
Yes.
And that
I was aware of it. Somebody had taken a screenshot. One of the potential whistleblowers had taken a screenshot of the computer screen where this memo came up on, because they were too scared to send it on normal email or anything like that. So I was aware of that.
So insofar as that is corroborating evidence, it is available?
Correct.
Screenshot of crash.
I think the screenshot might actually be annexed here somewhere.
Well, if it might be easy to find, you can have a look, but if it won't be easy, finding it might be homework for Monday. Just depends if it can be found quickly.
Yes, which you will mark on Monday.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
All right. So can we go on, and what is described in these words that we have just read onto the record is the purpose of the crash or alleged crash, that one could get rid of potentially hazardous data files that could incriminate the company and its directors. Is that consistent with your understanding of at least the first computer crash?
Correct.
Let's move on then to paragraph 34 on page 264. It reads, on the 13th of November 2017, after Carlos Bonifacio had been confronted by Gavin Watson contacted me and insisted to see me. I agreed to this and he came to see me at my office on this Friday afternoon. He wanted to meet at his office, but I said no. Carlos told Gavin Watson about my affidavit, as well as the affidavits of Andries van Tonder, Frans Forster, and Leon van Tonder. Carlos also informed Gavin about the meeting we had at Angelo Agrizzi's home the previous evening. Do you know anything about these facts? And we'll relate your recollection of facts to that date in a moment.
Chair, are we talking about the meeting at my house or?
Well, let's take it step by step.
Yes, because I cannot comment on the meeting with Watson and the
Yes,
office. I
yes.
don't know about
Yes,
that.
I think
I can-
Mr. Pretorius will just break it down for
Yes,
you.
I will.
Yeah.
Let's first start. Do you know, well, let's start one step back. By the 13th of November 2017, had the draft statement that you've attested to, prepared by Mr. Fenton, indeed been prepared?
I believe they were.
So by 13 November, Piet Fenton has his draft statement.
Correct.
He then talks about a meeting that he had with, amongst others, Gavin Watson. Do you know anything about that meeting?
I believe that there was a meeting where Gavin tried to convince him and got him to swear on the Bible that he hadn't signed the statement.
Tried to convince him of what?
Not to sign the statement, not to turn whistleblower.
Okay, so from your knowledge, however derived, you say that by the 13th of November, Fenton has prepared a statement, not yet signed.
Correct.
There then is a meeting, and at the hands of Gavin Watson, attempt is made to persuade him not to sign the statement.
Correct.
But you didn't attend that meeting yourself. You are basing your response on what you were subsequently told. Is that right?
That is right. I'm basing it only on what was told to me.
Then the last sentence of that paragraph reads, Carlos also informed Gavin about the meeting we had at Angelo Agrizzi's home the previous evening. Now, I know the dates might be hard to remember, but do you recall such a meeting at your home on the 12th of November 2017?
I recall the meeting vividly.
Right. So, in fact, it's correct that there was such a meeting at your home on the 12th of November 2017. You recall it? What happened at that meeting?
Well, at that meeting, we basically just discussed the way forward in terms of contacting, at that stage, we wanted to contact Billy Hofmeyer, we wanted to contact the Hawks, SARS, and that was basically what we discussed at that meeting, apart from, discussing as well the issues with regards to where the stumbling blocks would be and what avenues to use to go for the corruption matter and to clear that up and to clear up everybody's names.
Were the other members of the group to which you referred as whistleblowers, were all of the members of that group people who had previously worked for Bosasa but were no longer working for Bosasa, or were there some people who were still within Bosasa?
Chair, at that stage, it was only people that were with Bosasa, and the majority of them were whistleblowers. I think there was maybe 2 or 3 people, including myself, that weren't part of Bosasa.
Okay. Okay, no, I'm not sure if I understand it. Are you saying that most of them were still within Bosasa?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Right. Once again, Mr. Agrizzi, we don't know what anyone else will allege about this affidavit and its contents, but I've just glanced over the contents of paragraph 34 on this page and the following page. Nowhere is it said here in this paragraph 34 that Mr. Fenton told Mr. Gavin, yes, I've signed an affidavit, or I haven't signed an affidavit, I've prepared a statement, but I was forced to do so, compelled to do so against my will, but Mr. Agrizzi, it's not said here, and you know that.
No, definitely not.
Right. But what is interesting, at this stage, you say from your knowledge, the statement had already been prepared.
Correct.
All that remained, according to your evidence, is that that statement had to be attested to.
Correct, Chair.
So at the stage the evidence had been prepared, there appears to be no allegation when one might have expected it here that you had compelled its drafting and preparation.
Correct.
And you've already testified that the statement was discussed in December, early December, but you had no contact with Mr. Fenton in relation to its actual attestation on the 18th or 19th of December 2017, is it? 2017, yes.
Yes,
Is that
that is correct.
All right. Let's go on then. It reads at the bottom of page 264, Gavin wanted to know whether I have signed my affidavit. He was very relieved when I told him that I haven't signed the document. Was that fact ever related to you by Mr. Fenton?
Yes.
It goes on the next page. He asked me whether I am prepared to put my hand on the Bible, that I haven't signed the affidavit. I told him that I haven't signed the document and that I am prepared to put my hand on the Bible. It seems from your evidence that that too was related to you by Mr. Fenton.
Correct.
It goes on page 265, paragraph 34 to read. We had a 2-hour meeting. During this meeting, I have explained to him that the evidence against him will destroy him. He asked me to believe in him, and he assured me that he will get through all of this. He kept on saying that Angelo Agrizzi and Andries van Tonder signed off all the documents in the company, and they are also implicated. Was that told to you by Mr. Fenton?
That was told to me by Mr. Fenton.
Was it told to you by Mr. Fenton that Mr. Watson's attitude was that in addition to himself, Agrizzi and van Tonder were implicated?
It was a threat. It was always used.
Right. And by in addition to himself, I mean in addition to him, Gavin Watson.
That's correct, Chair.
The next paragraph reads, over the past few weeks, he kept on saying that he is not going to deny the fact that there were cash transactions in the business. As a matter of fact, he is going to acknowledge this and testify that Angelo Agrizzi and Andries van Tonder were the creators of the systems and procedures involving these transactions. He knew about this, and if the three of them must go to jail, then so be it. Did Mr. Fenton tell you that this occurred at that particular meeting?
That is correct.
Right, and it appears that what Mr. Watson was saying, according to Mr. Fenton at least, was that you, Angelo Agrizzi, and Andries van Tonder were the creators of the systems and the procedures involving these transactions. Is that correct?
That is correct. That's how it looks.
Did you create the systems and the procedures?
I did not create the systems and the procedures to corrupt people and bribe people.
Would you speak up a little, please? I know it's late on a Friday.
I think you need to repeat your question, Chair, if you could please repeat it.
Perhaps I'm being
maybe before he does, are you feeling exhausted now?
I am tired, Chair, and the
tired.
air conditioning doesn't seem to be working in the venue.
Yes. Well, I didn't feel that the aircon is not working.
It's hot and I'm falling asleep.
But that will be looked into. But you are tired.
I am exhausted.
You would prefer that we adjourn?
As it pleases my Chair.
Well, anyway, we were 7 minutes before we adjourn. Maybe we should adjourn, or do you want to? Is there one question, two questions you wanted to complete?
Far be it from me to persuade you to continue, Chair.
No, I'm quite happy to continue, but I think it's been a long day for the witness, and
it's been a long few weeks.
And if he is tired, we should allow him we should stop.
I appreciate that, Chair. We can start early tomorrow morning, if it pleases you.
Yes. No, thanks. We are going to adjourn. And we will resume on Monday at 10 o'clock. I take it you are still available, Mr. Agrizzi?
I put in a request, Chair, to
Yes.
to advocate
to the legal team.
if we could start a little bit later, because I do have an urgent appointment to attend to, but I don't want to disrupt the commission. I will postpone my appointment if I have to.
Okay, shall we say that we will adjourn until 10, but Mr. Pretorius will let me know about your request, and if we are going to start later than 10, we'll try and make sure that as early as possible on Monday we announce the later time for starting. So talk to Mr. Pretorius. He will let me know about the request, and I will evaluate it, and then you will be informed of whether we start at 10 or later, and if later, what time.
I appreciate your consideration.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
We therefore adjourn until 10 o'clock on Monday unless notice is given for another time for starting on Monday. We adjourn.
All right.